everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Sword and Strategy Podcast. As always, with you is Paul Paris and Josh Holmes. Hey, Josh, what are we talking about today?
So we're going to talk about conflict management. So conflict is inevitable when working with people, right? It's going to happen. People have different personalities, different moral compasses even. So everybody's got their own way that they walk in life. But it doesn't have to be destructive, right? In this
Right.
episode, we explore what strong leaders do and don't do when managing conflict. From active listening to timing your responses, we'll break down the best strategies to turn tension into progress.
You read that so well.
Thank
Sounded
you.
So good.
I have it on a sticky note.
We are so advanced here at Sword and Strategy. You know,
it's a technical sticky note. It's one of the fancy ones that's on the computer.
It's one of those digital ones? Okay, yeah. Sweet. You know, I'm glad we're talking about conflict management because I think when you go into management, right, leadership management, whatever, like conflict management is like, it's one of the scariest, I think, things you can come across as a manager. What am I going to do when all the stuff, insert whatever word you want there, hits the fan? How do I handle this? What do I do when an employee is upset at me? How do I handle this employee issue? You know, conflict management is super important to what we do. And I have a story for you real quick, Josh, about how not to handle conflict management from early on in my career. So I'm at the job site, right? And I have my office and then my team is separate. They're just down the hall. And the day before, we had just had this huge fire safety, don't plug in stuff, don't do this stuff, all this, right? Just no fire bad. So we just had this, and I had just gotten on earlier in the week to this employee I have. Let's just say his name is Old Greg. So Old Greg.
I know
Old
him.
Greg. Oh yeah. So I talked to Old Greg because he's not working. He comes in the morning and just does whatever he wants to for an hour, super unproductive. And I'm like, okay, get to work. Can't do this anymore, right? So here I come in on a Friday. I go to my office. I'm getting reports done, and I go into the office to say, "Hey, good morning, team. Happy Friday. Let's get cracking. Let's have a good day." I walk in and I see Old Greg is not at his desk. He's in the very back of the room, standing up with an apron, full apron. He's got a griddle plugged in, and he is making pancakes.
For everybody or just himself?
Oh, for everybody.
Oh, well,
for everybody. So that was nice.
He brought enough for the class.
But for everybody, right? And I walk in and I was so stunned because I just told him you can't waste any more time. You got to get to work. Right, the day before, we just went over this huge fire safety drill.
Is it wasting time if you're making waffles and pancakes?
Debatable, right? In a normal circumstance, no. In a business stance,
wait,
probably
are y'all
not
selling
either.
Waffles and pancakes?
No.
Okay,
no,
well,
definitely not. No,
yeah,
nothing like that. Right. So I walk in, I see the picture in front of me. Everybody's freaking eating pancakes. And he has this big, goofy grin on, and he turns around and he goes, "Oh, hey, Paul, would you like a pancake?"
You want a pancake? Yeah.
And I was so stunned that I could have either yelled and been like, "What are you doing? Fire!" You know, all this stuff.
Flip the griddle over.
Plugged in. What are you doing? Yeah, flipping some tables. Or I could have done what any sensible person would do. So, you know, as I sit there and I see everybody eating these freaking pancakes, I was so frustrated because I just talked to this guy about, you know, his timing and not working right. And I got so frustrated with him, or not frustrated with him, but so frustrated.
Him with a pancake.
Right. I did. No, I didn't do that. But we had this fire hazard safety training, all this stuff, right? That I was so frustrated. I didn't want to blow up in front of my team. I didn't want to blow up in front of this guy. And so I just quietly let myself out of the room and went to my office and called HR. I'm like, "Hey, HR lady, can you come down to my office? I have a guy who's making pancakes." That's what I did. I called HR and told her this. And she goes, "What? We have a fire hazard thing. We're not supposed to plug in anything, no heaters, no nothing, especially no griddles." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, tell me about it."
Yeah, come get a pancake.
Yeah, no. I said, "Can you come in and handle this?" Right? I'm thinking, I don't want to blow up. I don't want to lose it, but I need to handle this. And she said, "I'll be right there." And I sat back in my chair and thought, good, handled. I'll follow up. We'll be good. Next thing I know, I hear these doors open, come over to my office. HR peeks in and she's like, she comes into my office, by the way, Josh, with a plate of freaking pancakes, stuffing her face. And she's like, "Hey, Paul, did you get one of these pancakes? They're really good." And I said, "Hey, what are you doing? I thought you were supposed to handle this." And she goes, "I handled it. but these are really good pancakes.
But you can't let them go to waste, right?
Yeah, you can't let them go to waste.
You got to finish them off.
So the employee didn't learn anything. There was a conflict that was a major. If the GM would have walked in, I probably would have been fired on the spot because an employee was doing something that was a major safety issue, right?
Right.
And I thought I had backup, and HR was not my backup. They were freaking sampling the wares. You know what I mean? So I had to learn
these
really
had
quick.
chocolate chips. These are delicious.
Right? Blueberries are in here. It's so good.
Keep him around.
Oh.
Keep that griddle going. Maybe he's got some burger recipes.
But that was not a great way to handle conflict management. I could have just unplugged it and said, come into my office and, hey, man, I appreciate the morale boost of pancakes, but here's why we can't do that. Instead, I let somebody else do it because I didn't want to handle the situation directly because I was so frustrated. And it ended up not helping at all. He still kind of continued to do stuff, so handling conflict management, doing conflict management is different, in practice than it is in thought. You know what I mean?
Right. And that kind of segues into the first thing. You actually did something right in that situation. It's not entirely in that moment. One of the big do's for conflict management is staying calm. And if you know that you're not going to be able to stay calm, then walking away from the situation for a few minutes is probably the best thing you can do. It's going to be based on the scenario, of course. You got two employees fighting with each other. You can't be like, you know what, I'm going to step back and see what happens. And once I cool down, I'll come back out there. By the time you get back out there, there may just be a bloody mess everywhere. So
gross.
But in this situation, with pancakes being delicious as they are, you stepped away because you didn't want to just have a come apart on the guy in a public situation where other people were around. These are all big things that we're going to kind of go over during conflict management as far as the do's and don'ts.
Yeah. Understanding what is appropriate and what's not is really hard as a manager. And sometimes it's just through experience, you kind of gain some stuff. The first thing that I would say though, Josh, and let me know your thoughts about this, but the first thing I would say to anybody out there that's listening about how do I handle conflict management, to me, the most important part of conflict management is listening to what's going on.
Yes. To me, the most important thing is that remaining calm, is remaining neutral to the whole thing. That's your first step. But listening to what is being said to you is extremely important. So it really is important to make sure that you're listening to understand. A lot of people listen just to hear, but you need to listen to understand, meaning you're trying to catch their side of the situation, especially if it's a conflict between two employees. Then, we'll go over everything. We'll kind of break it down in detail, but I kind of wanted to, if it's cool with you, I kind of wanted to do don'ts first.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that kind of flows into it. So the first thing would be to not delay the situation. So you want to make sure that you're on top of it immediately. If you delay the situation, all kinds of things can go wrong. Say it is a conflict between two people. I have a specific of that one. One of my very first issues that I had at unnamed company. We'll call the two employees.
Never heard of that one before.
Yeah, I know, right? We'll call the two employees both Cephas and Sobephus. So
if you can keep that straight, by the way, like I'm super proud of you. Super proud of you.
So keep both going. Cephas will be the older person. Okay. Sobephus will be the younger person. Okay. Sobephus was known for being a habitual liar.
Gotcha.
Meaning they just couldn't help themselves. Both Cephas was your typical, worked with his hands, manual labor kind of guy. And in saying that, he was we do it this way, that's the only way we can do it kind of mentality.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Sobephus had been there longer at the company. So the younger guy, been there longer, thought he knew more, thought he knew that. So they both come across a situation where they both felt like their way was the only way to do it.
Ooh.
Well, instead of just coming and getting me, let's talk it out, they decide we need to fight this out. This needs to become a physical altercation.
Well, like actual like
their
hands being thrown
down. Yeah. So there's a lot of poking chest and cussing in the general area of customers. So another employee, we'll call them Snitchavus. Snitchavus comes and gets me.
Yes.
I go out there and I meet with both Cephas and Sobephus, and I'm
Good
like,
job. Good
look,
job.
we're going to talk it out. We're going to work it out, but we're going to do it somewhere else. So let's walk out to the side of the building, away from listening ears, away from prying eyes, and we'll have a conversation. So I get them both to the side of the building, and I take both Cephas to one side. I talk to him first. Then I take Sobephus to one side. I talk to them so that I get their sides of the story. The reason I'm coming across this is because if I had been like, they'll work it out and just
Yeah.
walked away, I guarantee you that one of them would have been on their back. These two guys were not your typical, I'm not going to be pushed. They're the I'm not going to be pushed around kind.
Sure.
Both
Sure.
of them. So who do I think would have won? You ask. I know you're wondering. I'd say
I
Bocephus.
was wondering. Okay, good.
Bocephus would have
Good on
won. It would have been a
Bocephus.
good battle, but Bocephus would have won. Sobephus, he would have been laid down after a while. But that's the kind of the way it is. You don't want to sit on certain things. There are certain situations where you can kind of step back from it, but typically you want to address any kind of opportunity like that as quickly as possible. You delay it, and it just festers. It becomes a wound that's just oozing at that point. That's
That's
probably not a good.
gross.
That's probably not a good visual.
It's not, but it is, but it's not, but it is, but it's not, but it is, right?
Mhm.
You talk about conflict management, and the word that kind of keeps come to mind goes right along with that nasty visual, Josh. It's fester. Like you don't want things to fester, right? When you're
Gross.
dealing with conflict management, that is gross. Shame on you, Josh, for even bringing it up. No shame on me for saying it even further. Shame on you.
I've got other words I could use that we've used in the past that I'm probably not going to use on this.
Let's not use those. That might make that might make me throw up on camera. That might get us some views, but that's not what we're going for.
No.
It reminds me though, when you think of working through a situation like that, and you talked about kind of being calm when things around you are not, and there's conflict. If you don't handle it there, if you don't separate people, if you don't try to get to the basis of it, and you delay, all sorts of things can happen. Not just, people actually get into physical altercations, which is probably the more less likely of things. People will get upset and mad. But what if you have a situation where there's clearly, after you do some research and you're talking, there's clearly one party that is completely innocent in what's going on, and one party that's completely guilty, and it's almost harassment. Like we're not here to talk about harassment today, even though that's a big thing on leadership, but of how to avoid that and how to combat that and all that kind of stuff, and how that's just, there's no place for in the workplace. But when you're dealing with an issue like this, if you don't deal with it right away, and the party that's the innocent party, if you will, knows that it's been a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks that you haven't dealt with it, then they have a legitimate complaint to HR that, hey, my boss, my leader knows this about the situation and won't do anything about it. Plus, it gives the aggressor conflict more opportunity to keep going, or for it just to get even more blown out of proportion.
Right. It is one of those things where you just want to, in those situations, it's just better to go ahead and address the situation, be done with it, move on from it. And like you said, it gives that leader mentality of, okay, he's going to handle it. He's going to take care of me. I'll do right. I'll do right by him. It gives a little bit more understanding as to how things are supposed to work.
Yeah. I think too, you said something that was really important. I thought, when you're dealing with two employees, or maybe it's even more than that, but if it's an issue that's personal, or it's an issue that's work related, it's not with a customer. It's not like you versus a customer, which has a different kind of conflict management what we can talk about. But when it's against two other employees, you had talked about for Bocephus and Sobephus, I got it right.
Well done.
You had to go out and you separated them, and then you talked through with each one, and you figured it out. And I think it's important as a leader and a manager not to correct or not to admonish or an employee in front of other employees, other peers, other managers that aren't related to them in the hierarchy of the job. It needs to be done privately and pushed aside. Even if you take both of them together and do it, it needs to be away from a group at large, if you have a group of employees that this is all affecting.
And it makes other people that are involved that aren't part of it If you're automatically involving them by bringing the situation in front of everybody, then it makes them feel uncomfortable and awkward as well. I had a friend of mine that usually when he was around some kind of argument or something like that, he would always look up and talk about the ceiling because it's very awkward feeling to be involved in somebody else's argument that you weren't even a part of. You're just standing there and now you don't know what to do. So either you hold up an awkward balloon or you stare at a ceiling and talk about the ceiling. That's what he used to do. He used to say, "That's a really nice ceiling. I love the look of that ceiling." And
I was
everybody
thinking,
would kind of be like, "Oh, I understand what he's saying here. He doesn't want to be a part of this, and we're arguing." So it's always good to keep it from being a personal show for everybody else out there. I know a lot of people have that mentality of I'll make an example of this person in front of everybody. And that's not good leadership at all. That's just not.
well, I think what that does, Josh, to your point, when you correct somebody or you try to fix a situation with all these eyes on you, yeah, and one spot in your mind you can think they can see how I corrected this issue and now they're going to think I'm great at all this, but it actually has the adverse effect.
Mhm.
After that, when there is an issue, you'll have an employee that says, I don't even want, I'll have an issue, but I'll just deal with it privately. I'm not going to go tell my boss because I don't want my boss to then air it all out in front of everybody and embarrass me.
Mhm.
They're
Mhm.
willing to do that. They don't have, the ability to take me to the side and do it privately and let's figure it out. My dirty laundry is going to be aired out to everybody. And I've been in those situations where you're in a room and somebody's getting yelled at for something, and I can only imagine what the person getting yelled at is feeling like. But for the rest of us that are listening to it, I've never once went, go, Mr. Manager, or go, Mrs. Manager or leader, you got
You
this.
get them. You
Instead,
get them.
instead, I'm like shrinking because it is the most awkward, horrible thing to sit through
Yeah, what
when
do
you're
the
in a
cool
meeting like
kids
that.
call it now? It's cringy. It's cringy. And it is. There's nothing worse than being in a group setting and somebody's getting in trouble, like you said, and it's just like everybody's uncomfortable. And even the people that want to see that person get in trouble, that's not how they wanted it to happen. They don't want to be involved. They don't want to envision it, and they'll tell you you probably shouldn't have done it that way. You actually have people that, and they may have been the ones that had the problem with that employee. They came to you and told you about it, and then thought you shouldn't have done that in front of everybody. That's not professional because it's not. You shouldn't do that in front of everybody. There are ways to address a situation in a group setting.
Sure.
I have
Mm-hmm.
used that before, but you're not directly calling out that one person. It needs to be a group thing saying, hey, everybody needs to make sure they're clocking in on time. Everybody needs to make sure they're showing for work every day or calling in when they're not going to be there, or whatever it may be. But if it's a specific, like, okay, I've addressed it with a group. Now this person's not showing up for work on time, whatever it may be. Now I'm going to pull them to the side. I'm not going to take the whole group setting again and be like, Bocephus, it's the last time you're going to show up to work late. And so, Beefus,
Right.
change your name.
Yeah, right. It, I know I've had situations where, like, I had an employee that constantly showed up 10, 15 minutes late every day. And we had conversations, hey, you need to show up, you need to be here. And they just never could get it together. And I told them, okay, it's about to turn into write ups, and they missed it again. And so I sent out a big email to not only this employee and the employees that she was with in her office, but I had multiple offices. So I sent it to everybody, every employee. Hey, as a reminder,
Mm-hmm.
if here's the policy, and if you follow this and this and this, we're good. If you don't, here's the steps that we take. And I did it specifically for her. It was 100% for her, but the email I sent out was for everybody.
Right.
And she called me after I sent it and she said, that email was for me, wasn't it? Even though you sent it to everybody and it was a general email, that was for me, wasn't it? And I said, you bet it was. 100% it was for you. I was calling you out in front of everybody without calling you out in front of
Right.
everybody.
Right.
You know what? We never had an issue again. She never showed up late. She was always on time. She said, I don't want another email like that where people start going, well, who's showing up late? And then starting to look around. I just would rather just show up. And I'm like, oh, good. That's a novel idea. Show up for work on time. How lovely.
Well, and that's the thing. When you do it like that, everybody knows who it is. Everybody knows who you're talking to. So in those kind of situations, it usually works because that person's like, ugh, and, that's definitely for me. And
Right.
that's what I've told mine is if you feel like if I'm in a group setting and I'm talking about a specific policy or specific thing that's going wrong and you feel a lot of pressure on you, maybe
Mhm.
that's you, maybe I'm
Maybe.
referring to you. So in those instances, it kind of works itself out. So,
Right.
hey, Paul, question
Hey,
for you.
hey. Yeah, Josh.
So, should I get real emotional when I try to talk to somebody about conflict? Should I wear my feelings on my sleeves and maybe even cry with them, or
You
use
know,
my emotions as a weapon?
ooh, ooh. I like these questions. Um, you know what? And to be honest, it's not a simple yes or no in fullness of what I'm about to say to that. I like the question, and I think that's where leaders can get caught up, right,
Mm,
or get caught in like a net. If what I mean by caught up, like if you have something like that in an employee, it's real emotional, or you have to step in and you have a relationship with that person, you've known them for a long time or whatever. It's really easy as a manager to let your emotions come out. It's really easy for you as a manager to not be professional in that matter, in that instance.
mm,
Especially if you've known the person for a long time, it's easy to kind of get into their face about something, or to excuse more behavior from
right,
what's going on. There's
right.
a lot of different things, and I don't think that you need to take the humanity out of yourself when you're a leader. They want to be so under control of what their emotions are that they come across as robotic and
Mm,
not caring. I think if somebody's showing emotion and somebody's really frustrated or how things are going, you do need to show empathy for that person. Not necessarily sympathy, that's something different.
mm,
But you need to show some empathy, that you understand why they feel the way they are. It may
right.
not excuse what's going on, right? It may not excuse it, and so you don't have to sugarcoat it. But at the
Right.
same time, when you can relate to them in a human sense, then even if you have to deliver like news like, hey, get a grip, you're wrong here. I
Mm,
get why you feel this way and I can see this and this, but here's the reality of the situation. You go into it from a place of empathy and understanding. I found that most of the time, 9 times out of 10, unless, the 10th time being the person that just is not going to listen to you no matter what. But
right.
if you come at somebody with empathy and understanding, they typically will listen to you more readily and get your viewpoint, or at least think around what you have to say, and the conflict kind of resolves itself a little easier. So for me as a leader, I've not worn my heart on my sleeve, but I've been ready to empathize with people if it's needed,
Right.
right? If it's a conflict where somebody's doing something illegal, I don't really have any empathy for you.
Right.
See you later, right? I don't have. There's certain situations where you don't need empathy and it's not warranted. But in a lot of situations, show that you have a heart, show that you're a human and that you care about the person, right? But not necessarily what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and a lot of times you can go on the other end of it and you make the mistake of using sarcasm, passive aggressiveness.
Right.
So I do agree that in most cases, having an attendance issue, what's because I've got to take my kids to school or I've got to do the. Okay, let's talk about this. You that goes back to the whole listening to understand part.
Yeah.
You want to listen to try to kind of get where they're coming from. You don't want to automatically put up a wall and take the side of where you're just wrong. And
Right.
so there's no reason for doing it. So, we're humans. Life happens. Things happen to you. There's reason for things being the way they are. That's why we put policies into place. And most policies are a fail safe or a last ditch effort. Except for when it comes to safety and things like that. But in most cases, when it comes to this kind of management issue, you have you have to listen. You have to understand, and you don't want to retaliate with some kind of negative emotion, some kind of sarcastic remark or belittling somebody or talking down to them. You can get your point across very sternly without talking down. There's never a time to talk down to somebody. There's never a time to belittle or make somebody feel less than. There's never a reason for that.
Yep.
um, you never have to use that. Never needs to be a tool in your arsenal as a leader. It should always be a let me try to figure out a way to make you successful instead of just getting rid of you altogether.
Right. And I think that's a mentality shift. I
Mm-hmm.
talked about a couple, one of the episodes before, I had talked about a situation I had where I had a boss that hated one of my employees and
Right.
wanted me
Right.
to get rid of them, and told me how worthless they were and how terrible they were, and they weren't worth the shirt putting on them for our logo and all these horrible things. And that was a manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
At telling me, you got to go there and you got to lay the hammer down and get him out of here. And I could have gone down that road. I could have said, yes, sir, no problem, and been robotic and gone down to that individual and said, hey, you're not cutting it. We're writing you up. See you later. Instead, I got to know the individual before that. So I didn't even share the same opinion, one. But when I got to know the individual and I hear that, man, give people a chance. Sometimes there's times, of course, where you can't because it's been over and over and
Right.
over or
Right.
something like that. But because I didn't take the tact of, how terrible you are, hey, this isn't really working out, like go. Instead, I took the tact of telling him the truth about how people felt about him, but telling him that that's not who he really is because I've gotten to know him. Let's work on how we can prove everybody wrong. It changed the trajectory of that employee.
Right.
And as a leader, you have to understand your people and the best way to get through to them or to talk to them. And that includes when they're in conflict with each other or with a customer or even with you. Everybody handles things differently and needs to be, it sounds weird to say everybody needs to be handled differently. That
Mm-hmm.
sounds weird, but I think you know what I mean. Everybody
Yeah.
requires something different. Everybody has their own personality, and the way that you respond, Josh, to a conflict and how somebody comes at you and how to resolve it may be 100% different than the way I need them to,
Right.
you
And
know?
I'll speak for me specifically. If you come at me with a aggressive, belittling tone and you talk down to me, then we're going to have a different form of conflict on our hands. I'm not going to, I'm not anybody's dog. So I'm not going to I don't talk to people that way, and I don't expect anybody to talk to me that way. So you also want to be careful how you
Yep.
approach people in that sense, because not everybody's going to put up with that kind of boss mentality of I do what I want to my employees, they do what they're supposed to. And that's not always going to come across well. You can get to people without being that way. And like I said, and if you come at me with a more of a passive aggressive,
Yeah.
instead of like, I guess instead of being to the point and coming at me with a suggestion, then I'm gonna be like, okay, well, you're my manager. You suggested something. That means I don't have to do it. No, be clear with your direction. Be clear with your point. And if I still don't get it, be clear with I guess, your next step you need to take. I'm not about beating around the bush, or I'd rather you get to the point, tell me
Sure.
what the issue is, and I think that involves a good situation where these kind of things arise. You want to be to the point. You don't want to beat around the bush. Let's say, for instance, I'll give you a scenario.
Yeah.
Little Susie comes up to you and says, "So Beefus smells bad. I can't
I've
work
had
around him. I
I've
can't."
had this exact scenario, by the way. I've had
I've had this
employees come to
scenario
me and said,
too many
I can't
times
work with this guy because he smells.
because
I
they
have I've
stink.
had that. Yeah. Yep. I've had that.
So I'll tell you how I approached mine.
Well,
So I would walk up to So Beefus and I'd be like, "Hey, you ever heard of a shower? Maybe some deodorant? Let's get this stuff going, man. You smell like a pig. Done. It's dealt with." I'm just kidding. I don't do that. I don't do that at all.
that's one way. That's one way to handle it.
That's just straight to the point.
And that
I've
scenario
actually
is out
been in
there.
that scenario multiple times in different companies, where somebody has come to me with a hygiene issue of some other employee. Now, actually, some companies have policies in place for your using of that kind of situation, so it's easy to be like, "Hey, our policy says you've got to be clean." Um,
Right.
but typically, I would sit that person down and be like, "Look, I don't know if you know, sometimes the body changes and deodorant stop working, or I try to go through some peaceful scenarios, and I don't just outright. I'm not just like, "Hey, man, you hadn't took a shower, you're smelling kind of ripe." Um, because there are situations that people can't control. However, when you work a high intense labor job and you sweat a lot,
Sure.
you work basically up under each other, all around each other. Nobody wants to work with that kind of employee. So in those situations, you just got to be blunt about it. You don't have to be rude, but you've got to be
Sure.
straightforward. And you just want you don't want to constantly be like, "Wow, somebody on the team is stinky." I'm just saying, not looking at you, but it's better in my past history, I guess. It's better to just go ahead and pull that person to the side. I've never had a negative reaction to that. Most of them are just like, "Oh, I didn't know." So, and a lot of
Sure.
times they don't. Um, but everybody else does, and I did, and it was
Right.
terrible.
I had a guy, really good friend of mine. We worked together, and he was just a sweaty dude. Like he was sweaty, like all
We'll
the
call
time,
him
right?
Sweatman.
Sweatman. And we were always working outside,
Mm.
where we were working, and he would come in drenched, you know. But he knew that it didn't matter when you're sweating like that. It don't matter what you do. It's going to have, there's going to be an aroma, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So he knew it, and he always brought like 3 shirts with him to work, and he would go.
See,
He'd go take care of him. Yeah, I mean, good
applaud
job
that
on
guy.
him. So good. He's a great guy, actually. But those are delicate situations. This is like super niche what we're talking about. Not every
Mm.
day as a leader you're going to come into a place and go, "Wow, there's some BO here. Take a freaking shower someday," and get going. I don't know if you've ever been like, don't do what I've done. Like, have you ever been to like I've been to some, yeah, I'm looking over here at some notes that we're getting. And if you've ever been like a Comic-Con, or like
Mm.
I'm a gamer. Let's just throw it out there. I know you are
I
too,
worked at a
Josh.
game store, sir.
And I have been to some events that are super fun, really cool people. They may not be the most like, they're just some different people, and they're wonderful people, but they've never heard of deodorant.
Mm-hmm.
And there were so many of them that instead of walking around going, "You stink, you stink, you stink," I just grabbed a bandana and wrapped it around my nose and walked around and acted like I was wearing something cool when all I'm doing is trying not to smell so I don't throw up.
I'm dressed up as Banana
So
Man.
I am bandana man. It's not that. And if you have a situation, sure, bring that employee aside and go, "Hey, don't know if you notice this, but
You stink.
there's an issue, right? Are you okay today? Anything going on?" Because sometimes you don't know, right? Sometimes something like that is actually an underlying health issue, and that's something else completely that you can
Mm-hmm.
get into.
Well, that's why you don't want to
But
just dive into it with your own personal bias as to, oh, you just don't take showers or any kind of situations like that. You're just a hothead. You're just you're very passive. You're very, you don't ever want to. I mean, I've worked with people for 15 years and not fully known
yeah,
everything about them. I mean, some people are more reserved. Some people don't give as much out. So you always want to go in with like you said, a perfect. Hey, everything okay? I've
yeah,
noticed something's changed. Let's have a conversation.
sure. That comes to mind something else, so we can get kind of stop talking about smelly people for a minute. But it reminds me of just because you've dealt with one situation before and one set of issues or conflicts or whatever that people have doesn't mean that when that arises again, you need to handle it the same way. Different people respond to different things. And one way that I handle conflict for this person in this exact situation, maybe I need to do it differently for this one over here. Right.
Mm.
Like, again, that's where getting to know your people. That's where having some of that humanity as a leader comes in, that it's required as a leader. You
Right.
can't lead people if you're
Right.
just bashing them or always telling them, "I know better than you and here's what it is."
Mm.
You got to listen, and you got to understand where they're coming from. Even if they're 100% in the wrong, you got to understand where they're going and help them to understand why things are happening the way they are, what led to it.
Yeah, you can't constantly beat them with your authority hammer. It's not conducive at all. It doesn't help. It's better to get down in the trenches and know who they are. That makes you a better leader, in my opinion. Some people are not going to let you know, but the more you work with them, the more you'll get out of them. So I guess to the next point, um, a don't is to don't leave it without an outcome.
Mm,
When you have that conversation with somebody, you've jumped into that altercation, problem, opportunity, whatever you want to call it. I like to call them opportunities because it's a more positive spin on things. But when you have those opportunities, it's best not to leave it up in the air. Like, you don't want that employee walking away thinking, I'm not really sure what we talked about or if anything's going to get done. I don't even know
right.
where I am. So it's it's
So
more
true.
of,
It's
it's
so
more of
true.
a, you want to make sure at the end of it you recap the conversation. Okay, Bocephus, you got a little angry today. You let your temper get the best of you. We can't have physical altercations. Number one. Number two, we can't have arguments in front of customers. Those two things just cannot happen.
Well,
So you want to make sure that there's some kind of understanding of what's going to happen going forward, what's going to be the end result of how this is going to work out.
yeah, I think that's where communication part of it comes in, right?
Mhm.
You listen and to understand, but then you've got to clearly communicate to them what the situation is. Sometimes it's best to say, hey, so what I'm hearing from you is this. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? You say that out there to them. Then you repeat what they've said. And if they say, no, that's not what I said. Okay, cool. Tell it to me again so I can understand, because this is my understanding. When you communicate all of this to it, then when you come to a solution, they feel like, okay, they've heard me. They may not like the solution at all. Right? I've had plenty of people that I've said, here's what we're going to have to do. And it's like, I hate that, Paul. I don't want to
Right.
do that. I get it. I know you're going to hate this. I just had a conversation with a guy this week, or excuse me, last week, where I told him, I said, we were talking about issues, in a company and stuff like that. And he said, sometimes we just, instead of dealing with conflict, we just put a Band-Aid over it
Mhm.
and then hope it goes away. And I said, well, I told him, I said, to fully heal conflict, we don't need Band-Aids. We need to rip them off and let it heal, figure it out and let it heal. And, I said, and when you do that, when you rip a Band-Aid off, it hurts. It's painful, especially if you got hairy arms and it's on your arm, right? You rip hair out and you're like, oh my gosh. So I think, Josh, there's a lot on this topic. We only got to like 2 don'ts in here. So I think as we were going through this, we've just kind of explored a whole bunch in this it felt like a short time, even though we've been talking for a while.
We've actually touched the don'ts. We just didn't express them. I can recap them if we need to.
Yeah. Well,
I've got
sure.
them.
Go ahead.
I've got them wrote down in my handy dandy notebook.
Oh,
Hold on just 1
sweet.
second.
Oh, let's see your handy dandy. Are you going to show the people your handy dandy notebook?
No, I'm not. So, don'ts. Don't avoid or delay the issue.
Yep.
We covered that.
We
Don't
did.
take sides prematurely. Covered that. Don't be biased.
Nope.
Don't use public settings for resolution. Covered that also.
We did.
Don't use emotions as a weapon. I specifically asked you about that one, remember?
You did. Yes. Yeah.
Don't generalize or exaggerate. Oh, we didn't cover that one. Don't make it personal. And don't leave without a clear outcome.
Yeah.
So, and in saying all that, conflict management is actually easy to do
Right.
if you stick with the number one rule, which is keep your head clear, keep calm, and listen. Listen to what they're saying. Are you going to be able to fix every problem? Are you going to be able to fix the so and so doesn't like me? Are you going to be able to fix the, oh, I don't like the way you do this? Well, it's a policy. I can't help. What are you doing with your hand? What is this?
For everybody watching, as we try to figure out, as we try to figure out, as we're doing this podcast, and everybody bear with us, but as we go through this, for those that aren't in my office here, I do have a producer that's kind of in this general area, and I'm trying to figure out how they're. Look at that hand. And when I try to get a hold of the producer, like I need to say something or like look at something, I've been trying to use hand signs, and I realize on camera I'm doing this, and I look down and I'm like waving my hand like this, and I'm going. So then I just started. I lost my mind for a minute there, Josh. Sorry. I'll figure that out later, everybody.
That's okay. It's good stuff. So main things are be cool, calm, collected. Any altercation that you come across in life, in my opinion, cool, calm, collected. When you react emotionally, throws everything out of proportion. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. So hope you're standing back far enough because you're going to get burned.
Yeah. So I think what we should do here, Josh, is Oh, see, this is just what we do now. We're randomly going to be doing jazz fingers. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Bob Fosse. There's all the things we're not supposed to do. What am I supposed to do? How do I actually handle it?
We can't help with that.
What if it's? I know I'm unhelpable sometimes. That's not even. Is that a word? Unhelpable?
Yeah,
Sure.
Yes, now.
I like it. We're going to use it. But it's also important to say, here's how to handle it. Here's how to do. We're doing like people with each other, or maybe people with you. We're not even talking about what if there's a conflict between you and a customer, or when your
True.
employees and a customer. That's a whole different set of stuff. So join us next week as we continue to talk conflict management. Thanks
Do's
everybody for
and
joining.
don'ts.
Yes. Have a good one, everybody.
We came, we rambled, we conquered. Your attention span. I said that wrong. We came, we rambled, we conquered. Your attention span. We out.
All right. Here we go.